Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Hey y'all, hey, we are back again with Black History Meets, and we're gonna talk about this unsung hero who is Mr. Bernard Lafayette. Now, Mr. Bernard, he was outshadowed by a lot of people, but again, in my research and really looking at freedom riders, I dove a lot more into John Lewis because he was the well-known congressman. However, Mr. Bernard Lafayette was Mr. John Lewis's friend and was there with him in his last moments. So let's get to it. Mr. Bernard Lafayette, put both his names together. That's how quick my mind just jumps to stuff. Mr. Bernard Lafayette, a student activist in Nashville, Tennessee. He did sit-in campaigns in the 1960s, and he's a longtime staff member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. Bernard Lafayette gained a reputation as a steadfast supporter of the nonviolence movement before Martin Luther King offered him a position in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as a program director in 1967. Now, Mr. Lafayette was born in Tampa, Florida on July 29, 1940 to Bernard Lafayette Sr. and Verdell Lafayette. Bernard was the oldest of 8 children. He began working at the age of 11 years old to help support his family, and he, interestingly enough, went to integrated and segregated schools in Florida. And there's a story that he states about how he was out and about with his grandmother at the age of 11, and she had paid for them to get in the back of like this trolley kind of bus, but as soon as they paid their money, the bus took off. And so he was like, he knew then that he was going to be fighting against segregation after that. In 1958, Mr. Bernard moved to Nashville, Tennessee to attend the American Baptist Theological Seminary. As a freshman, Lafayette began attending weekly meetings arranged by James Lawson, a representative of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and he set up meetings with Mr. King about the Montgomery bus boycotts. So Mr. Lawson was the person who showed how to do nonviolent activism. Throughout 1958 and 1959, in partnership with Nashville's SCLC, Lawson taught nonviolent techniques to Lafayette and his fellow Nashville students, including John Lewis, James Bevel, and Diane Nash. James Bevel and John Lewis are depicted here in this picture, and in between them, you can see is Mr. Lafayette. And this is them doing a sit-in or a protest of a sit-in, that I showed back with when I was doing John Lewis and the Freedom Riders. Or the Freedom Riders and John Lewis. Now, energized by Lawson's classes and a weekend retreat at the Highlander Folk School, Lafayette and his friends began sit-ins at segregated restaurants and businesses. And I don't know if I stated, I know I did in other videos, but at that conference, the younger folks were supposed to join the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. However, they decided John Lewis, James Bevel, and Diane Nash, and some others, they were like, including Mr. Stokely Carmichael, were like, hey, we're going to do our own thing and come up with our own little group, and we're going to call ourselves SNCC, the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. Now, this conference took place Easter weekend of 1990. And as I stated, they were energized by this, and so they began to do sit-ins at restaurants around this time. Prior to the Supreme Court's ruling in 1960 in Boynton versus Virginia declaring segregation at interstate travel facilities unconstitutional, Lafayette and Lewis integrated an interstate bus on their way home from seminary by sitting at the front and refusing to move. Months later, in 1961, Mr. Bernard answered a CORE announcement recruiting students to participate in Freedom Rides. Now, as I stated when I was speaking about Mr. John Lewis and the Freedom Riders, Lafayette's parents was like, you ain't going. However, after the first group was attacked by Klan members and thwarted, he joined the second group. So he met up with Martin Luther King, Diane Nash, and John Lewis, and they decided to go to Montgomery, but they were attacked by Klans members as well. And so MLK, he contacts the White House to ensure there's justice and ensure there's protection on the bus, and that they have military escort. Now here's a picture of MLK. He's shaking the hand of one of the Freedom Riders as they're about to leave Montgomery and go down towards Mississippi. Here's another picture which actually depicts Mr. Lafayette, Bernard Lafayette, right there in the front, white shirt on, and the U.S. Marshals and National Guardmen were actually physically on the bus riding with them from Montgomery to Mississippi to make sure that they didn't catch no hands, or, you know, they didn't get any violence. So in Mississippi, Lafayette was arrested and served 40 days in Parchment. So after serving his 40 days in Parchment, he was re-arrested after he was released because they charged him with contributing to the delinquency of minors because he used students to recruit them for the bus ride, and all of them were under the age of 18. In 1962, Lafayette became director of SNCC Alabama Voter Registration Project. The following February, he and his wife began voter registration clinics in Selma, Alabama. And I kind of want to go back and just show another photograph of Mr. Bernard standing next to John Lewis, who has his fist up to his mouth, and they're preparing to board a bus. And again, this is in Alabama on the Freedom Ride. Now in Selma, this young man, unfortunately, he got his head bashed in. This was on the SNCC's website, and underneath in the caption, it stated that he was beaten in Selma, Alabama in 1963. I don't know if it was for the voter registration or if it was part of a march that he did, but he had just as much heart as Mr. John Lewis, or at least some. I can say he was arrested 45 times, but the dude, bless his heart, went through a lot. And again, we can't avoid grocery stores. So in the summer of 1963, Mr. Bernard and his wife were hired by the American Friends Service Committee to begin testing nonviolent methods in Chicago. And also when Martin Luther King Jr. had launched the SCLC, the Chicago campaign against poverty, and of course, racism. He appointed Lafayette, who was still there in 1966, to help plan and execute the campaign. Now, after Martin Luther King hired him as an SCLC program coordinator in 1967, Lafayette took on the responsibility for the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. And in that year, MLK unfortunately was assassinated. Lafayette continued to work on the campaign with Ralph Abernathy, and Lafayette received his MD, his Master of Education, from Harvard University in 1972 and a doctorate in 1974. In 1973, Lafayette was named the Director of Peace Education Program in a college in St. Peter, Minnesota. Transitioning here into his later years, he goes more into education and he's teaching at schools. He also, uses his seminary degree, and he becomes scholar in resident and over theologies and stuff at different universities. For example, I stated how he was the first director of Peace Education Program in St. Peter, Minnesota, but he also was the dean of graduate school at Alabama State University, which is HBCU. Anyways, I only know that because I lived in Montgomery. And in a distinguished scholar in resident at the Chandler School of Theology at Emory University. Sorry, I picked schools that I knew that was listed. And Emory is the university associated with the CDC, and as an epidemiologist, Emory is the coup de grace. It's like, it's the chef's kiss of all things academia. Sorry, John Hopkins, but it's Emory for really epidemiology. And of course it's in Atlanta, and he served as the scholar in resident at the College of Liberal Arts at Auburn University, again in Alabama. He served as a scholar resident at the King Center, and after teaching at several universities, he was named president of his alma mater, American Baptist Theological Seminary in 1993. And Mr. Bernard went on to write several books about his experiences in the civil rights movement.